Ladies, gentlemen and ladies, my LGBTQ family, what's happening? Where you at? Welcome to a session of Coffee with Dragan. This session we're going to drink, of course, some coffee, and we're going to do some reading and analysis. But first we're going to do a brief commentary on news, local, national, and international, of course. Stay hydrated. On the island of Montreal today, another record heat. The heat wave continues in Montreal and across the world, and it seems like September is going to be a third consecutive month here in Montreal and across Canada, I believe also North America, that we're going to have record temperatures. Let me know in your comments, message me, what do you think about the climate issue? Is it important for you personally? What do you think can be done? Of course, myself, if you don't know, you will know that I'm a firm supporter of environmental issues, and I'm an advocate, strong advocate of solar power, which is clean energy. Start by drinking a little bit of coffee, pour yourself a cup. We're gonna go for a few minutes, maybe a half an hour or so. In the news, of course, here it's election days in the province of Quebec, Montreal, of course, so a lot of different election talks. And of course, in the local news, there's also the question of our ongoing negotiations with NAFTA. NAFTA, of course, stands for North American Free Trade Agreement, and of course it's a topic of importance, so we'll share a few thoughts, analysis of NAFTA. So NAFTA, if I'm not mistaken, was signed between Canada, United States, and Mexico in 1994. And of course it has been developed in the 80s with several agreements between the countries, with of course the main goal of increasing economic trade, that is, increasing trade, commerce, and economic transactions, if you will, exchange of goods and services, and also important to note the movement of people somewhat across the borders of North America, that is Mexico, Canada, and the United States. And so it has been ongoing, of course, but now, of course, the Trump administration, with Trump, of course, taking lead to impose the tariffs. Now NAFTA is ongoing deep negotiations, more profound negotiations. Of course, NAFTA, it's like I said, not 100%. 1994, it could have been 93 December or so, or whatever, but I'm pretty sure that I'm correct, that it was 1994 that it was officially signed into agreement. So basically, what is it? Like, if we were to just look at NAFTA from a general, to have a general idea, NAFTA, of course, stands for North American Free Trade Agreement. And if you ask me, I would put also fair, because if I would be a negotiation, I would say North American Free Trade Agreement also fair and free, right? Because certainly the growing corporate takeover of the economy and the financialization is not in any way, shape, or form fair for the people. Putting profits over people as corporations, and as the bottom line of looking out for the shareholders only for profits is not gonna conduce us to a higher type of society and civilization, global civilization, right? So NAFTA, North American Free Trade Agreement, put an F in NAFTA, North American Fair and Free Trade Agreement. Join me. So of course, generally it was for the elimination of trade barriers. what is actually a trade barrier? How do we define? What is it? Well, it can be most, if not most, trade barriers are, of course, the exclusion of a certain good or service, right? Service, of course, and specifically tariffs, right? Tariffs when cross-border trade takes place, import and export. Let's say, for an example, that before the NAFTA agreement, Mexico did not allow corn, United States corn, or Canadian corn for that matter. But after the NAFTA corn was allowed into Mexico, or vice versa, that Canada and the United States did not allow tequila. Let's say tequila, right? Tequila, because it's an item we do not produce in Canada or the United States, right? Tequila. Not a big drinker myself. Once a week, wine twice a week, Friday night, Saturday night. That's about it. But there are people who drink, of course, so tequila, of course, being maybe an item that's desirable for percentage, whatever the percentages of the Canadian and US population. So let's say before it wasn't allowed, and after NAFTA it was allowed, or not necessarily not allowed, but there was a 20% tax on, in terms of dollars, on that item X and Y, and vice versa, right? Because it goes back and forth. It's not just what Canada is going to import and export to the United States, but it's what the United States is going to import and export. So both import and export, they include, this is important to keep in mind, that it includes both import and export in NAFTA, right? So right now, as I'm drinking this coffee, of course, there's trucks flowing across the United States Canada border and across the Mexico US border with goods that can range from raw materials to goods and that are already ready to consume, such as, for example, maple syrup. If you don't know, Canadians, we're very proud of our maple syrup. And we have good maple syrup, healthy maple syrup, and so we're very proud of that. But we should also recognize that it comes from nature, and even though that, and this is a spiritual perspective, myself as a spiritual teacher here speaking, that we should also be mindful that nature processes made for the maple syrup to be able to be enjoyed and consumed for our pleasure and health. Right, so any good would be included like that into NAFTA, with of course the different details and specifics, and we have to take industry by industry. And of course it goes with services, although of course we have to discern and take it in a bit of a different analysis, because of course goods and services, although they all convert and transform into dollars, Canadian dollars, US dollars, or for that fact Mexican pesos, it's not quite the same how they're employed or changed or utilized. So NAFTA, what is stalling NAFTA? It seems that it's a big problem now, but have to denounce the tariffs that Trump imposed on Canadian steel and aluminum, that it was bad for business and counterproductive, and that we need a more fair North American economic integration and trade, and the reform of NAFTA has to be fair, has to come to a win-win situation, right? But Boris, Trump, of course we have to understand that was born in an environment with wealth. He was born with the silver spoon, right? And so a different understanding of economics and finance, or looking for the interests of a minority, an oligarchical monopoly, is no good. It's no good in the short run now, in the medium to short run, in a month, and 6 months from now. What is NAFTA? Exactly. That's about it. That's about what NAFTA is. An agreement, economic law to integrate the economies of Canada, United States, and Mexico. But integrate, although we haven't reached it, integrate of course to a certain level, because if we look at the European Union model and how they progressed their integration, they went a step further by adopting the common currency, right? Which I'm actually in favor myself of a world currency, but I'm not going to that. Another cup of coffee. My coffee from Cuba is running short of supply, so maybe tomorrow. So the European Union started, of course, as the, I believe it was the EEC, European Economic Community, like 1954, so in a decade after the Second World War. So, and that it progressed, but and then the Treaty of Rome, another Treaty of Maastricht. So it was an evolution to it, transformation and evolution, if you will, of the treaties, and then it gave what we have today, the European Union of today, with many countries adopting, of course, I believe it's 25 countries adopting one common currency. So this is the next step. It's called monetary integration or currency integration. Basically is the banks having a common central bank to issue a common currency across the territories that have still maintained, of course, an independence, political, if you will, independence, because the European Union does not have a common foreign policy as to date, right? And so NAFTA is very, very, very similar to the European Union, save that it's a commercial, to integrate the commerce and trade and the economies by eliminating trade barriers, such as, of course, tariffs, or barriers to trade, such as not allowing a certain good or service to be traded for X, Y, and Z reasons. Of course, you can see, now this is a general view, but you can see how it can be a complex issue in certain matters. For example, cigarettes, alcohol, pharmaceuticals, right? So whether we like it or not, it touches upon, of course, all cultures, right? Culture. Let's say, for example, I don't know, let's take, for example, movies, right? Or clothes. Let's take clothes, right? There ought to be certain clothes, right? Fashion. Maybe those clothes were not allowed to be sold because for XY reason. And now they are, right? Toys or so many other goods. and from that to, of course, agricultural goods also, goods in of agriculture, and not just because of one factor. It could be several factors. One important factor is of because how it will affect the industry of the other countries. For example, if, let's say, give the example of maple syrup. Let's say the United States would also have maple syrup and Mexico would also have maple syrup, you know? So that would be a concern for those producers of maple syrup in United States and Mexico, right? To compete with Canadian or maple syrup producers. And let's say Canadian maple syrup producers were by a big shot more what's called in economics, what's called, I guess you can say, effective or productive, or their productivity. This is the word, basically. Productivity, efficiency, they kind of revolve around the same, basically meaning that, you know, you produce more per employee, you produce more per, let's say, square kilometer, you produce more liters and better quality also, perhaps both together by one tree, you know. So you get the idea. So that's, of course, economics. Economics, right? Now, of course, protectionism goes the opposite way, right? Because protectionism imposes tariffs on the other without trying to find alternative solutions, right? Because, see, what I find in a lot of places that we look when we get together to discuss issues of concern, to push for policies, advocate for change, reform, we think that sometimes it's only black and white, when in fact it's a lot of gray, and we forget to circumvent and put a little bit of color and say, well, wait a minute, why shouldn't only be two choices, right? Then win-lose. Why can there be win a bit and win less? Right? You know, in this situation. I'm not talking, of course, in competitive sports, which do love, but of course, it's a different matter. So North American news revolves, of course, these days around NAFTA. It seems that there have been negotiations, the US administration with Mexico, leaving Canada out, and now there's some tensions between our administration, which is currently Liberal one, the Liberal Party of Canada, more or less equivalent to, of course, the American Democratic Party, and it's, of course, by Trudeau. Now, of course, Trudeau's father was a Prime Minister of Canada. A lot of people have that criticism, and duly noted, that Trudeau was born with the silver spoon, that he's a trust fund kid, that he doesn't really understand the day-to-day realities of 99% of Canadians, or workers worldwide, or people worldwide, artists who are struggling financially, such as myself, for example. Right? Now, surely, and I've imagined also this scenario, me and Trudeau sitting, you know, with other workers and other workers having their concern, myself saying, recollecting my work experience, worked, for example, for several years for Sears. Had to wake up early in the morning and had to unload the merchandise, right? And for several years they only get one raise, and a very small raise. Sure, there was the financial crisis that affected our hours and all that, but that understanding of the hard work, and that, as people still work hard and not respectfully paid, consequently the minimum wage, and I like to use minimum wage, living wage, way better, actually, we're living wage, right? Social solidarity. So sure, you wouldn't probably understand the struggles in such a way, right? So, and this and that, or working for several years as a receptionist, and again, the minimum wage back then, several years ago, right? And the struggle thereof, right? Or self-education, and the struggle with poverty, right? Yeah. So of course, in that way, him and Trump have more in common. But that doesn't mean that there's not a common understanding and that we cannot work for win-win situation. Both, instead of win-lose, both win a little bit less, right? What's happening? Big egos, something spiritual that's going on. What do you think? Some people think that it's something spiritual. Myself, as a spiritual teacher, I do believe in a sort of karma. That's why I advocate charity and deeds of goodness and kindness. Deeds of goodness and kindness. And even, of course, the question of charity is important, to be charitable, but also important to have public, strong incentives for the citizenry. Encourage volunteerism for those who are on welfare, on social assistance, for those who are less well off financially, right? For example, finance fitness, an active lifestyle, from the grassroots to the middle and the lower class, right? My initiative, I've launched for myself and for others together, the World Citizens Gym. I'm live streaming every week. My workouts on Facebook, open to all, and have a vision. PM me if you want to support, contribute, finance, and check it out, of course, on Facebook, World Citizens Gym. Because that's part of also societal inclusion and cohesiveness and healing and strengthening, and of course with a philosophy behind it. Right? Anyways, North American news revolves mostly around NAFTA. Locally here, it's the election concern in provincial Quebec. So I have provinces in Canada, 10 provinces and 3 territories. So Quebec is the election. I'm not sure yet as to who I'm going to vote. Want to see their platform and everything, and see their platform. And so That's of course important. Free education, increasing the minimum wage to a living wage, increasing social assistance, and encouraging, while at the same time, so that for X and Y reasons to be socially included, encourage to those who don't work in our society, encourage volunteers, volunteer, right? In X, Y, and Z organizations, food banks, food depots, open more, volunteer with the police. Right? World news, ladies and gentlemen, revolves, of course, around Syria. Of course, that's a tragedy. Hopefully, let's meditate for world peace for a second. Hopefully, there will be peace, and we strive towards peace and understanding via love. Syria is, of course, a conflict that's ongoing, and it seems that Russia has intervened even more in Syria. I remember the terrible days that started after the Arab Spring. And the chaos, confusion that's in Syria and has spread from there, and the alignment, of course, of armies of the East against the armies of the West, and that revolving around Raqqa and Syria, and of course the birth of ISIS. And do not use ISIS for spiritual reasons, because I'm involved in the goddess revival movement for many years now. Have been involved, and do not like to use ISIS, for it represents the name of the great goddess. And so use Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, or ISIL Islamic State, just Islamic State, or the Islamic Caliphate. And of course, we've supposedly heard that the self-proclaimed Caliph Abu Bakr is alive, and it has been claimed Islamic State Caliphate attacks recently claimed in Iraq. Right. So that is, to me, the most important pressing issue for world security, peace, and prosperity to that point. There, we gotta achieve peace. Argentina. Argentina was hit, and is being hit, as speaking, with financial crisis that started, of course, with the currency crisis. To be specific, the devaluation, rapid devaluation of its currency. The depreciation, of course, mostly against the US dollar, since the United States dollar is the unit of exchange of the world trade system. Not the only one, of course, there's the euro, the yen, Canadian dollar, and other in the top 10, but the United States dollar by a big percentage, I believe it's 84%, if I'm not mistaken, around 80% of total currency, the trade going on in the international, the global financial system. And of course, within the global financial system, you got the import and export businesses, the goods and services, and the forex, foreign exchange. So they're interlinked, right? So tourism, person travels to a country, usually through US dollars, changes into local currency and vice versa, right? So an import and export, the different corporations of the world operate on a multinational level, and of course US United States dollar currency for world trade. It's the most by a big margin, and of course petroleum. When people's economists, financial analysts, teachers say petrodollar, they refer that the petroleum, the barrel, is mostly, of course, put in exchange against US dollars, against the United States dollars, traded, right, between the different countries of the world. Oil, that is crude oil, right? That's basically what it means. It has other, of course, ramifications and dealings, but mostly that's what it means. That petroleum mostly is traded in US dollars. So if Turkish lira or Argentinian peso, first they convert into US dollars, or so, to buy the petroleum, what have you. So I'm oversimplifying it, but in a way it's try to oversimplify it as much as we can, so, and then to go deeper into the understanding and see what can be done to find solutions myself. Still learning, we're all learning every day. Right. Argentinian currency has depreciated. I believe it's close to 80% since the beginning of the year. So imagine, 80% is a lot, especially in import and export. So all to give a general analysis and a truth. So basically, it cost Argentina 80% more since it cost them in, like, let's say 11th of February, and that's gonna cost them. That cost them now 80% more for what goods and services that they import. 80% in 6 months can have a big effect on the economy. Big effect. We're not talking about 8%. 8% is bearable. Just like interest that is below 10% is bearable. When you get to 15, more than 15, it's pressing, right? Below 15, I usually say below 11 is bearable. When you increase by more than 15, this of course is not the same as interest that you pay, or that people pay, or that institutions pay, or corporations pay, or governments pay. But 80% loss of purchasing power, basically, meaning that the Argentinian peso bought 80% less, let's say, United States dollars, because the depreciation usually occurs against the US dollar in the forex, foreign exchange. And there's a lot of different factors that influence forex and currency fluctuations, appreciation, depreciation, but usually it's just small fluctuations, but this one is a big one, 80%. So what does that mean? Purchasing power means that an Argentinian peso bought 80% less United States dollars, or buys 80% less United States dollars tonight, now, 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, than it did February 11th at 9:30 Eastern Standard Time. Wow. And might be off by that percentage, but nonetheless, it's around that. Because I believe there was even in a day that went for like 15% in 3 days or so. Imagine not losing 15% purchasing power parity, which is by the currency devaluation, which it's a crisis. It's a currency crisis. Is losing, is dropping down the purchasing power of the Argentinian peso. It's depreciating at an alarming rate. And so there's of course some financial speculators say that this is from 3 weeks ago because of the currency. They had a currency crisis also, the lira. The lira is the currency of Turkey, and so it also depreciated a lot in the past months. And so several things were implemented, and people were seeing this as being a link with the contagion in the emerging markets. So the emerging markets are basically countries like Argentina, Turkey, I believe Brazil is there, South Africa. They're closely parallel to what economists, financial analysts, and professors call BRIC. If you heard the term BRIC, stands for, not a brick like that, but in finance and economics stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China. The BRIC countries. This is emerging markets, so there's some parallels there. So countries, of course, such as Turkey, emerging markets, I believe Turkey, Argentina, I believe in Europe, Romania is included there, with sometimes when people speak of the emerging markets. South Africa. So yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, that was a Coffee with Dragan session. Comment topics that you want to see me discuss. Love, support, finance. Come show love on Facebook. Blessings of healing, physically, financially, and spiritually, to all my friends and allies. Ladies and gentlemen, gentlemanly lady. Is my LGBTQ fan.